Hello. hello. And
I can hear you.
welcome to Old Romans Unscripted. Hello, Brother Stanislaus. How are you?
Hello, Excellency. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well, thank you. A slight hiccup there, but I think
Sure.
we're okay now. Welcome to our viewers. Please, as usual, do greet us. Say where you're watching from. Peggy there from Eastern Tennessee. Hi, Peggy. Trevor, of course, and Father Thomas. Excellent. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. As you can read from the description, I am in Slovakia still. In fact, I fly back to the United Kingdom tomorrow. We had a subdiaconal ordination this morning for September Embertide, which went very well, but apologies to those of you who tried to watch the live stream. Sadly, a technical hiccup meant that after the censing of the altar at the beginning of the liturgy, it suddenly went dead. So apologies for that. I, of course, was in the middle of the liturgy, so there was nothing I could do about it. And in fact, I didn't even know until toward the end of the liturgy that even had occurred. So apologies. It was a beautiful liturgy, has to be said. It was very good. It all went very well. The servers did brilliantly, as did the choir. The scholar were superb. It was a beautiful liturgy, and I'm very sorry that you missed it. But c'est la vie, c'est la vie. To err is human, but to foul things up completely requires a computer, as they say. Now, of course, some of you will have seen myself and Brother Stanislaus last night for Extra Murati. And Bishop Kelly, don't panic, is going to be joining us, but a little later on. But I wonder, for the benefit of those perhaps who didn't see last night's edition, whether, Brother Stanislaus, you could give us a short précis of what we covered last night.
Yeah, if anybody paid attention, that's always difficult to go because we talked about so much. But what we're really talking about is the corruption of Peter. And that's what we have been for the last 7 episodes, been talking about. Who is Peter? If Peter is corrupt, what does it mean? What does it mean to us? What does it mean to the church? And then how do we respond? And we've been through all those questions in about 7 shows. And so we're at the point of really, we know who Peter is, and we kind of know what's going on. And the interesting thing is that the perspective coming from this show or from Friday's show, you also hear it coming from other commentators. But it's not, how do I put it? It's because he's already, Archbishop Vigano. You look at what he's saying, and he's a little bit more, I would say, hyperbolic to me. He's a little bit more hyperbolic, but he's coming around saying basically the same thing, that there's something wrong and we're at a crux. And so that's where we are in our discussion for Romani Extremurati Remugiant on Friday evenings or Friday afternoons here in the United States.
Yeah, now, of course, Archbishop Vigano has been quite outspoken about the state of affairs in the church, and has even called for an overturning of Vatican II, complete overturning of Vatican II. Likewise, Bishop Athanasius Schneider has not exactly been silent on that point, or in terms of criticizing Vatican II. He suggested actually a few years ago that a commission should be established to definitively interpret Vatican II, so that there isn't any ambiguity, and people know what they are supposed to know from the council. And the ambiguity of Vatican II is has played complete havoc on the church, but compounded, particularly, of course, by the Novus Ordo Missae,
Yes.
which, because it is the thing that most Catholics experience on a regular basis, has had the most impact and effect. Because I think there are two aspects to the crisis in the church. There is definitely, of course, a problem with the hierarchy and a problem with the contemporary magisterium, which is, pretty much self-evident, really. But also, too, there's been a great falling away from the faith by many Catholics. And that, I would say, has been as a direct result of the Novus Ordo Missae, of the new Mass.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, it doesn't inspire, it doesn't encourage faith and devotion. And of course, its orientation is all wrong. Aside from ad orientem or versus populum, it's anthropological. It's all about us and not about God.
Yes. I think the words that I used yesterday were communion. That it is, and they're not afraid to admit that there is. It's only now, though, 50 years later, that we're actually hearing some of them admit that it's a new theology. Some, and including the current occupier of the seat of St. Peter. I think in this interview that he gave, again, another plain interview, which he said plenty, but it's almost like the Catholic media, and the Catholic media, if the Catholic media is here, then the secular media is way out here. But even the Catholic media, they take it and then they don't do much with it for a few days, and they go and read it and they go, did he really say that? And then they publish it. And then the secular media might pick up on Archbishop Vigano, something, he'll use the word apocalyptic. And so they'll say, oh, he's a prophet. He's declaring that it's the end times. And so, it's a balancing act in trying to, report on what Bergoglio says and does whenever he's out, or even from Rome. So I think that what I was thinking of, that it didn't come to me till yesterday, but everything we've been talking about in Friday's show, and then we finally get to, in discussing the church as a tree and Peter as the taproot, and Peter's corrupt, Peter's been split, and I thought about the lightning hitting the
St.
Basilica.
Peter's,
on when Pope Benedict announced his resignation. And, I don't know, but it certainly could have been that's split. And so now we have not just physically, but I think we've talked about that there's something else going on. It's obvious that, Peter is not who Peter is supposed to be. And he doesn't speak like Peter used to speak with that certainty, because you didn't really hear from the Pope unless there was great something going on in the world. Because I think we talked about this last night as well, that it didn't used to be that everyone was waiting, well, what did the Pope say? Because we have what we have now. So even with Vatican II, because I've heard this argument by Novus Ordo Catholics, that there hasn't been enough time with Vatican II. We're still waiting to determine. It's only been 50 years. And my argument back to them is that, well, in the past, maybe, but with the way we work with media today, internet, phones, all that, we instantaneously know what's going on. Someone's telling us. So that, that speeds things up. So 50 years has been plenty. And so the problem I have with, because I think it was the Latin Mass Society guy from the UK. Again, he did he's on one of those sides. He's a traditional guy, but they were all okay with the way things were, in the sense that let us do what we want to do over here, and whatever you're doing over there is okay as long as you let us do what we want to do. And now you have Francis saying things like, well, it's a different theology. It's even it's a different ritual. It's a different rite, and he's trying to explain his way out of it when really what he's doing is digging the hole deeper, and we recognize that because, our argument being so old as it is, because people, it's not your and I's argument, it's the argument we've held on to because of everything that happened to the old Roman episcopate and clergy, or the original ones. And so and then getting to your point with the Novus Ordo theology, even if there are converts to the traditional Latin Mass, they don't have the formation to properly understand, comprehend, and apply in their lives the traditional Latin Mass. Now, I know that it can happen by going. You simply go, but that can take years, especially if you don't have any help.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the problem, read the liturgy, and we had the pleasure of the company of some faithful Catholics here in Slovakia who joined us and participated in the liturgy. And it's incredible, actually, the number of former seminarians I've met this week, who could see that things weren't right. But one of the things that came up in conversation today about the liturgy was the fact that if you don't know the old rite, then you're not going to be able to understand the supposed need for reform and what the reform was. So generations of seminarians and thus priests in the last 50 years, unless they grew up with and have a knowledge of the traditional rite, are being taught in seminaries about a reform. And indeed, over a decade ago, Pope Benedict started talking about a reform of the reform, but with no knowledge about what actually was being reformed. Because if you don't know the old Mass, you don't know where the concept of reform was coming from and what it was referring to.
Is that not what Francis referred to in his letter when he said something like, they're clinging to something they don't even know. And so I'm taking this away in a pastoral way because they don't know what they're doing. And if they just get on the train, everyone can get all that from the new.
I think that is basically what he is saying. But of course, it's not true. There are far more people around still that remember and even grew up with the traditional Mass. And there are a huge number of younger people who in recent decades have become attendees and become faithful Catholics through the traditional liturgy. So his argument doesn't really hold much water in that regard, but that is what he is saying. That is what he is trying to suggest.
Yeah, and I think because my immediate question to you that I thought of with the former seminarians you're meeting, I'm wondering, well, are they recent former or are they longtime former? And then secondly, are they saying, Excellency, would you consider receiving me? Because if they're seeing all this, what is keeping them from finding refuge in this place of safety and certitude?
Well, I would say to the first part of the question, over the past 20 years, so from so the past 2 decades, so that's the breadth of the experience and the ages of the men I've met and been speaking to, exploring or continuing to discern vocation, this is the first time that an old Roman bishop has been to Slovakia. So this is the first time for many of them to come across us and to realize us. And in many ways, this week has been a kind of soft launch for the mission in Slovakia. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few months and years that some of these former seminarians may indeed gravitate towards us. And bearing in mind, of course, that with certainly with the younger ones, it isn't so much that that they had any experience of tradition, but they were bright enough to realise from what their seminary professors were trying to teach them that something was wrong. That it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense on the one hand to be so authoritarian about things, because they are, particularly when it comes to the Novus Ordo liturgy and a kind of animus against the traditional liturgy. And of course, that just provokes the question to these seminarians: well, why all this animosity toward tradition? Why this animosity towards the traditional liturgy? I mean, and to the extent that even a penchant for classical music, through to the mere suggestion or notion of using or of offering a mass in Latin. I mean, just the Novus Ordo Missae in Latin would just elicit extreme negative responses.
And that's where kind of I mentioned Novus Ordo that will sort of convert over, and that once they discover the traditional Latin Mass. And where I was going with that, where I think we all end up going, is that when people want to convert over, there isn't there time necessary for them to simply become aware of everything that's happening in the traditional rite that doesn't in the new rite? And because the theology, as I've realized, the theology is just not there in the new rite.
Yeah, I mean the theology is totally different. I mean, just look at the explication, the so-called explication by Francis this week in his aeroplane interview, and something spoken by the Black Pope, meaning the current head of the Jesuits. Both of them espousing this notion that the Mass and Holy Communion is all about us, is all about the communion of people. Whereas, of course, the Mass isn't. Well, the communion of the people is secondary. In the first instance, the Mass is Calvary. It is the representation, a bloodless representation of the sacrifice of Christ upon the cross at Calvary. It is the supreme and sublime offering that can be of worship that can be offered to God. In other words, which only Christ could do, but through the Mass we're able to unite ourselves with Him. And offer right and true and worthy worship to God the Father, which is the fulfillment of the first commandment, which is the love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and is the whole purpose and reason for our existence. Now, secondary to that is that in doing that, we are able to realize communion with God.
That's right. Yeah. Yes.
And it is in our communion with God that we realize communion with those who are in communion with him. So it's not about the horizontal communion between those around, those in the church at the time of the Mass. It's about communion with God and communion with each other in and through God.
Yeah. And if you look at Pope Francis' answer, the way he explained some of these things from this plane interview, it sounds kind of like what you said. He ends up getting to the same thing, except what I hear is that the way you explain it and the way it's properly explained, it's reasonable, point by point by point by point by point. It's critical theology, really, understanding the old rite. Okay, but he comes in and it's like he begins this. I'm Pope. I'm the Catholic. This is what, and then he goes all around that to end up to the same thing. So to the regular, uncatechized person out there in the Novus Ordo Mass, they hear that and that's so beautiful, because it does sound kind of, but he's missing all the parts. Is my point?
Yeah.
You're the way you explained it has all the parts. He gives us like the skeleton, and to me, that's what the new Mass has become. It's simply a skeleton of the traditional Mass.
Yeah. Hello, Bishop Kelly. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you? Sorry for being late.
Good.
I was a number of things to do here, plus to reboot my phone because I'm in the boonies again. But
no, that's all right. That's all right. You're most welcome. Yes. Well, you can guess what we're talking about. The latest rather than ex cathedra, ex aeroplane statement or statement.
Yeah. Nobody should pontificate from business class. Is what I think. It's just he thrives on these statements, these giveaway, because it's folksy, right? And it's and he can always backpedal too, and it's also laissez-faire, and it's a mess. It's what it is. It's a mess.
Well, yesterday on the show, the Archbishop summed it up by saying it's chaos.
It is chaos. It's coordinated chaos. It's coordinated chaos. It's typical Jesuit. You contrive this chaos, which you have some sort of control because you're pulling strings, and you can always feed into it if it's going the right way, and back out of it if it's going the wrong way. It is very Jesuitical, and
what they call it these days? They call it positive manipulation.
Positive manipulation. Okay, great.
And that's what he's doing. I think that's what he's doing. He's using, like the wizard behind the curtain.
Yeah. No, it's exactly it. I went to last night. I went to pick up a pizza because I didn't fancy cooking for myself, and for those out there, it was a margarita pizza. I did not bring. It was a margarita, and but I was waiting for it, and I had a beer at the bar, and this lady started talking to me and asked me, etc., who I was and what was, and she said, I had such high hopes for Pope Francis, but he's let me down. And that's something you don't normally hear, Then she started to ask me. She said, "I've read this article on cancelled priests, and one of them in Chicago." So we got into a bit of a discussion. And I had a second beer, and and then she brought in two others who were sitting beside her. And I had a bit of my pizza there, and I brought the rest to go. But it was a very interesting discussion. And lay folk aren't as dumb as you think. even Novus Orderites, if we call them that, they're starting to see the wizard behind the curtain. If I can use or continue with your analogy, brother, they're starting to see it. It was. I had no intention of staying there at all yesterday, but for that conversation and the three people who eventually joined it. I mean, they're very disappointed with Pope Francis, and they would be Sunday going Novus Ordo Catholics, and they can see it. So,
yeah,
the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I think people are starting to see. I noticed when he was in Hungary and Slovakia. He's still doing that gimmick with the beaten up leather satchel going up the stairs, and come on. I mean, do you not? I mean, honestly, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's such a gimmick. I mean, it was sort of, the media fawned over it when they first saw, well, he carries his own bags on. Come on, he has miters and staffs and vestments that are all being preloaded onto that plane, and he's gone up with his beat up old satchel.
yeah.
It's absolutely. I mean, if you don't see through this, you're an absolute moron. But I think most people don't, because they just sit there with their wide open eyes, their wide open mouths, and they just absorb what the media feeds them.
We live.
Start thinking for yourself. A Catholic is one who thinks,
prays,
and
acts.
And acts. I mean, you can't sum it up better than that. Think about it. Look at this. Look what your eyes and your ears are telling you. It's a gimmick. It's it's honest to goodness.
But I think part of the problem for particularly the contemporary situation is that so many people live their lives semi-virtually and are bombarded all the time with so much stuff that people we were talking about this earlier today, that people have stopped knowing how to listen and how to interpret information. And also, people aren't sure what is real and what is not, what is true and what is not. Because, the contemporary zeitgeist is all about relativism, and there's your truth and my truth and other people's truths. So, what may be true for you is not necessarily true for me, and yada, 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 yada.
And then there's the cover of Time magazine.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. They're big my truths, you truth. Sorry. Go on.
But I mean, we had just recently, of course, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Now, one of the things that I remember from that day is the number of people who weren't sure that what we were seeing wasn't some kind of virtual hoax. So even 20 years ago, we've been living in this kind of virtual world since, I would say, from the turn of the millennium. Really. I don't know if that's necessarily portent or significant, but certainly it would seem to me, thinking back over the last 21 years, that this virtual existence has kind of fallen on the world. And with it, people are confused, but also lazy. People have become lazy. They take everything more or less superficial face value, and can't really be bothered to investigate anything further than what they've just read or heard or seen. And this is a problem, I think, for people generally, but also obviously a particular problem for people in the church, because this is part of the reason why the crisis in the church has been so sort of obfuscated, that it's only now where things are becoming to be more pointed, that the scales are beginning to fall from people's eyes, and they're beginning to realize, actually, there is a serious problem here. There is a serious problem here. I mean, I spent some time with a parish priest here at a Marian shrine, and I could tell, he's a very pleasant man, very sincere, very devout, has an attachment to the traditional Latin Mass, is gutted by Traditionis Custodes, and recognizes that this is a serious problem for the church, that this is the tip of the iceberg, but feels at a loss to know really what to do about it, or how to respond or handle it. And I think part of the problem is for those who are of tradition but not in it, it's very easy for them to become or to feel isolated. I mean, I would describe it, I described it at the time as I felt a kind of sadness about him, a kind of almost not despair, but a sadness, because he is sad. He almost cannot believe what is happening, and so he doesn't know how to respond to it. He doesn't know how to deal with it.
It's like being disowned by your own family.
Yeah.
People you've loved and trusted have disowned you, and it's very difficult. I mean, I pray for these priests. Even the conversation waiting for the pizza the other night, talking about these cancelled priests, it's the same sort of thing. They have been silenced by their bishops or their superiors because they've stood up for orthodoxy.
Yeah, they stood up speaking the faith and speaking the principles, and the doctrine that the church has always taught and officially still teaches.
Yes, I mean, the early fathers could not disagree with them, but yet, they find themselves without parishes. Not laicized. Well, some of them.
Well, some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to use the term of the modern era, yeah, cancelled, absolutely cancelled.
And yet, and yet there are people like James Martin and others who get away with murder. Who preach heresy. Who preach heresy?
It's not just James Martin. It's archbishops and cardinals.
Yeah, I mean, look at Germany,
who actually have the job of teaching, like Suppic, who's the Archbishop of Chicago. I mean, the whole reason for him being archbishop is to preside over the archdiocese and to preach and teach and be the custodian of the sacraments, and he's teaching heresy.
Yeah,
you cannot publicly say a Hail Mary after a mass.
Well, they denied that, but that's the problem.
Oh, come on, yeah. Look, it's clear.
The problem I'm having is that
the priest published the email.
I saw it before it was taken down, but the problem I have with the canceled priests, because I do sympathize, of course, but do any of them turn away from the Novus Ordo? Do they see the error in the Novus Ordo and say, oh, I can only do this? Or do they continue to say the Novus Ordo, they continue to teach the Novus Ordo, they continue to present the Novus Ordo sacraments, because to me, that's a compromise. It's a corrupt compromise. And maybe they don't understand it completely yet, but
I think some of them, haven't toppled to that bit yet.
And I think there is compromise there. Others are on a journey of progression, and they will eventually realize it. Some of them have realized it and said, look, this has just been, a farce from the get-go. So I don't think you can talk about the cancelled priests. They're not an homogenous body. They've all been cancelled probably for different or similar reasons.
But my point is, how many of them?
I get your point. I get your point.
Keep what they have, but they say, well, we like this, but they keep, who's given up everything?
Yeah.
Besides
some
us.
of them have, some of them have, but yeah, they're hedging their bets. And my hope is that they are on a journey of discovering. And you have to remember, these men are relatively young. In fact, they're not relatively young. They're on the whole young. Their brushes with traditionalism have been probably occasional and not encouraged, certainly during seminary. So my hope and my prayer is that they are on a journey. My hope and my prayer is that they are not, being mediocre or hedging their bets because of a pension or a rectory or anything like that. I'm really disturbed by people who are motivated by that. I get it, you got to live, etc. But what doth it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul? It's I just pray for them.
It's gotta be tough.
It is really tough. I mean, do you give up everything for truth? My answer is yes. But how do you get there? You don't get there in a heartbeat. It has to be some sort of thought process or realization that'll take a little bit of time. And I would say, for the majority of these men, look, the church has treated me like this, then dust the sand off your sandals and walk on to the next town. It's but I sympathize with them. I pray for them. It's a tough position to be in. This is so strange because I was having this conversation last night while waiting for a pizza.
We kind of were as well, because these things came up in the show. But the reason why I'm asking is because that's really, where I think we end up. We end up at this crossroads. They do, is my point.
Yeah.
And I would not be here with the two of you right now if I didn't believe that the Old Romans provide something that is unique in the Catholic sphere right now, meaning that there's a purity in tradition with the Old Romans that you can't find anywhere else. I mean, I called it on the show a hidden gem, really, like a lighthouse out in where you thought there was nothing, only because the Old Romans have been out there for so long, and so they've had to find a way to survive. And so these men who feel like they've been disowned. My point is, and that why I am so loud and why I wanted the Friday show and doing other things, because I want them to see what I saw, that there is a safe place. There is a place to come. It's a journey, yes. And you're going to end up giving up maybe everything, like you talked about, and that's tough. I mean, you think of like someone like Father Altman who's taking care of his elderly parents. Well, I read he just bought a house in the diocese, so he's obviously not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So, to me, I get it, and I'm kind of there, but I'm like, well, if you went a little further, like with us, he could cause a lot of great conversions, and that's how I look at that.
I believe that, and we have to. I mean, I think the role is not to cajole or proselytize them, but I think we should definitely let ourselves be known to them that we are an establishment, and a number of us have realized the reality of the truth of the matter. That is sort of the end of the direction they're going, and I think the approach to it is to say, look, I know where you're going. I've been there at that point, and I've reached this conclusion. If there's anything I can say or do to help or point you in any sort of direction, let me know. And yeah, I do agree. We are a hidden gem. The gem is not us. The gem is the truth.
Yes.
The gem is the Catholic religion.
The pearl of great price.
The pearl of great price. And it's nothing really to do with us. It's just that we've held on to it.
Yes. Yes.
And small and feeble as we are, our voices and actions speak for us. There are many others who would claim to be us, but it's all talk and no action. So I think that you are right, brother. The fact that I wish these men would discover, or at least be in dialogue wherever they end up. If they end up with the SSPX or one of these other groups, whatever it happens to be, I'm not going to be upset about that. But if they dialogue with us and we can help them find a resolution to where they are, to help their consciences, to enhance their priesthood and their ministry, I'm happy to help anybody on any sort of spiritual journey. I'm not in it for chalking up on the board. How many have we got now? That's not the purpose. It's people have to realize, or at least if I can help them on their path to realize. I've said this before. We are all created and put on this earth for a particular time and for a particular purpose. Now the trick is, and it's a difficult trick, is to figure out what the purpose is. We could do nothing about the time, and that's the whole thing. It's subjecting yourself to the will of God, to find out what your vocation, what your calling in life is, why God put you here in this particular time for a particular purpose. To find out what that purpose is, to subject yourself to that purpose, and to live it out in perfect freedom. Now, it's dichotomy what the world would tell you what freedom is. Why would you subject yourself to the will of another? That's not freedom. Of course it is. If it's why you were created, that's perfect freedom. Now, the formula is simple. The figuring out of it is not. And it gets more and more complicated when we're converged with all these different influences, be it through the media, politics, church, that it really muddies the waters. And of course, that is the influence of the devil. He wants to muddy the waters. She wants to confuse us. But we have to resist that. We have to find out what and truth is there. We have to remember that truth is not subjective, it's objective. And therefore, scientifically, we can find what it is through our intellect. And when you realize that, a path becomes available. Now, you may have to cut a few weeds and a few brambles along the way, but there's a path to an objective truth. And, of course, Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. But there are other people before Christ who almost got there. You look at the Greek philosophers, etc. They were referred to by the fathers of the church as Christians before Christ. There is a way, and we can do it. We have to start thinking. Stop absorbing all of the influences that we're bombarded with. Stop absorbing and start independently thinking for ourselves. I have many criticisms of John Paul II, but one of his best documents is Fides et Ratio. It's a philosophical document. It's not a theological one, really. But it's faith and reason. And if we don't use that and engage with that, we're doomed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's a famous guy who says, "You are the salt of the earth. Stay salty, my friends." I would say, you are a rational being. Start thinking, my friends.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And that is, as where we kind of started this.
Well, I do apologize for
No.
missing
Oh, no. But it's just it's something that constantly comes up because it's reality. I mean, it's the truth. One of the things I said earlier this week, my homily on Tuesday for the exaltation of the Holy Cross, was that people need to think, need to use reason, and the church used to be the place for that. The church was a haven from the world, and in the formation of consciences, the part of the purpose of the church is to enable people to think. Fides et ratio. But the church today, of course, has succumbed to the zeitgeist. And so everything today is about emotionalism. It's all thinking, it's all feeling rather than thinking.
It used to be, and Benedict used to say, the error of relativism, but I think it's gone a step beyond, as you just said. It's now emotionalism, which is even worse than relativism. To be relative engages the intellect at some point, poorly, but to be emotional, and Thomas Aquinas warns against this. The fathers warn against the passions, and it's just, you cannot give into your emotions because they are perpetual liars to you. They lie against your intellect, and now we're run by these emotions, as the Orthodox would say, the passions. And it's chaos once you do that. Absolute chaos.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we see in the world, but also in the church. And when we when you listen to Francis on the plane, it's emotionalism. Whenever he makes these off the cuff remarks and things, he is emoting and appealing to people's emotions. So he wants to appear to be the nice guy. He wants to appear to care. But what he's doing, of course, is not helpful at all, because what he does is obfuscate the truth. He doesn't teach except error.
I was struck this week. I think it was, what are we, Saturday night? I think it was Thursday. He met with the President of Ireland, and the article I read is that they discussed the shoring up of the peace process in the north of Ireland, which of course is a serious thing. However, I mean, he is the pastor of the church worldwide. He wants to discuss, as important as it is, I mean, I grew up in the north of Ireland. I'm very well aware of the situation, and it does need shoring up. And there is, because of Brexit, there are complications and things. You know, emotions are running high again. But the headline should have been, the Holy Father discusses with the President of Ireland the hemorrhaging of the church in Ireland, the closing of parishes, the falling away of the faithful, the fact that they're closing things left, right, and centre. I mean, the church in Ireland is almost dead. From the Isle of Saints and Scholars to from the bed of the re-evangelization of Europe after the Dark Ages, after the barbarian invasions, it's almost gone. And I would have thought the Pope would want to discuss that with the President, the state of the Church in Ireland, and maybe, you know, get on as a part of that, talk about the peace process. Of course, peace is very important, certainly on the island of Ireland, but that would have been maybe not a footnote, but, you know, a few paragraphs down, not mentioned. Of course, that doesn't make headlines. You know, Pope discusses peace process in Ireland, and, you know, he's just got it so wrong. So wrong. Why has the Irish government supported abortion, divorce, everything that's happened since the 1980s? You know, the legalization of or the disharmonization of what we call marriage. All of these things that the Irish state has done, you think that would have been top bill for the Pope to talk to the President. Even though the President is neutral politically, but he is the head of state. So you can raise that with him, and he can go back to the government and say, I was speaking with the Pope and he raised these issues. Nothing. Not a dicky bird. And that's the Pope of woke, you know. Just talk about the cool issues, you know, not the controversial ones. And which is really sad, and you know, it's not as if he's up for re-election. I can see politicians going, you know, bending with the wind because they have to be re-elected to maintain power. But I mean, he went through an election, he got it. That's it. He doesn't have to run for another term or appeal to the populace. So stand up, not for yourself, stand up for the faith, for God's sake. Stand up for Christ.
That's what I think is so curious, and what I hoped we have tried to center and maybe clear up a little bit on the Friday show, is that he is all that, but he's decided to be sort of the first non-denominational pope. You know, he is the one setting what is going to be happening. He's got to see it that way. He knows he's old, and so he's going to get as much done as he can. And so he sees himself as the savior of tradition. So when you say those things, or the Archbishop, or I say these things that, you know, or even his guardians of tradition, Traditionis Custodes, he claimed that for himself. He is the guardian of tradition now. And so every generation afterwards will learn from his, at least that's what we've got, because we're not going to win. That's just it. Is that, you know, I don't think any of us there's not going to be any win where all of a sudden we're all going to be we won, the church is new. That's going to be when our Lord comes, in my opinion. Yeah. But I don't think so. I don't think that the Archbishop said this a couple weeks ago, and I said yesterday in the epilogue that, are you really going to look forward to the next Pope? Really? You know, after all that's happened, you know, after all that's been done, it's so obvious. And so, you know, I almost, you know, in the way, pulling my hair out, you know, trying to get the message across and working, and just like you guys have, because we see the same thing. You know, it's kind of like, you know, we're on the ship and we see, there's you know, it's getting ready to fall over the edge. and only God can save it. And of course he will in whatever way that's going to be. But in the meantime, my point has been, or at least the point that I've tried to make, is that if even at some point, I would think, Noah had to panic a bit. Not for himself, but because he must have loved the people around him. He wouldn't have been the righteous man that he was if he didn't really feel, like you both were saying, you feel the loss of what the people don't even know they ever had, And so young people today feel that. They've never had it. They weren't taught, they weren't brought up on it, but they're showing up. Why? Because they're being compelled by the heart. And so Noah, too, was compelled by that same heart, the sacred heart of our Lord. And there must have been a point where he was going, okay, come on. I'm telling you guys, you better get on now. And they're all still saying, you're crazy, man. You're a kook. There's no water. Sun is shining. Everything is great. In fact, we're getting to do whatever we want to. So, but I think that we still have the obligation, and why we're here today, I know, to continue to scream and pull our hair out and try to get the message across until God calls us home.
I'd pick up on 2 points that you made, that young people who've never known tradition, in fact, there are fewer and fewer who have known tradition, what appeals to them is the very fact and the realization is that we are designed for divine worship. And it speaks to the heart. Now, I've talked about emotions leading us astray, etc. There are other things which I wouldn't call emotions, but they are certainly in modern parlance feeling. It strikes a chord. Is that a better analogy? It strikes a chord in the heart, that you know that this is right, that it appeals to you, that you're drawn in by the divine. And young people are drawn in by the traditional worship, the worship basically that was established by Christ and by the early fathers and the church in her wisdom throughout the ages. And they're turned off by something that is stuck in the past, 1960, 1970. And I do think, and the great hope is that the youth, that's generations to come, that heart speaks to heart, and that that's an analogy with the devotion, the cultus of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Heart speaks to heart. I think that's what's going on. That the divine heart of Jesus that was pierced on the cross, that give rise to the symbolism of both baptism and Eucharist, is speaking to the hearts of people, young people, and they are drawn in by the traditional liturgy. Mm-hmm. The other point that you made about next pope, this pope, and a lot of Catholics are say, well, you can't go against the pope. Unfortunately, we suffer from this ultramontanism, this cult of papology, and I'm not detracting from the importance of the See of Peter, but we've seen it come and go throughout. Again, use your intellect, crack a book and read. We've had popes and anti-popes. We've had the whole Avignon experience. They do come again. What do you expect from the next one? Probably more the same. This all cycles through, and it has done in the history of the church. And if you read that, you can say, "Oh well, yeah, that's we're just stuck in one of these bad cycles. A good one will come along eventually." And take heart in that. But people fail to realize that all this sort of this kind of stuff has happened before. Maybe not to the degree of messing with the faith. It used to always be true. The bad popes were very conservative with the faith. It was the good ones you had to watch out for. basically the bad ones didn't really care and they didn't want to mess with it. They were doing their own thing. But it's like the faith is maintained by our Lord Jesus Christ, who is the head of the church. His representative on earth is the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, although this one has now put that aside. But I think the English audience might get this more than the Americans. But vicars come and go. You get good ones, you get bad ones. They're there. They provide the need. They hatch, match, and dispatch, and the rest you can take with a grain of salt. And I think it's the same with this modern papacy that we've experienced in the 20th century and now into the next. But I would take heart from history. Please use your intellect, read some history, crack a book, see that this is similar to cycles that we've been through before.
But I have to disagree. No.
Well, it's not quite the same because they didn't mess with the faith as much as they've had. But
they didn't mess with the faith and didn't mess with the liturgy.
That's true. I'm talking about the comings and goings.
The comings and goings.
Yeah, but we are the worrying point is the liturgy, which is the bedrock, and also the trimming of the edges of the faith, and it's that is worrisome. But I think my point still remains is that
it does. I just would. The only thing
it remains with you to remain true to the faith,
mm-hmm.
and no pope can tell you this way or other way. The revealed truth of our Lord Jesus Christ, which has been handed down through the centuries, if you remain true to that, then you've nothing else on your conscience.
Sure.
You have maintained what was mandated by Christ, not mandated by Francis or Paul VI or JP2 or anybody else, or even Pius XII. But if you remain true to the faith handed on to you by our Lord Jesus Christ, then I think you're on a sure foundation.
I don't think anything can be more true than that. The difficulty that I have found is that when young people do come over, they do want more. You spoke of the heart to heart, just like in the way St. John of the Cross would speak of a lover to a lover. You do desire more. You want as much as you can get, at least for most people. And the problem is, there's not anybody left to give it. Yeah. I mean, even the SSPX priests, because they're not a teaching community. So I have found, at least the places that I have attended their chapels, them to be a bit dry and unable to do anything but offer the sacrament, which is fine, but they're not, they didn't go to school to teach. So their catechism isn't there, and so many of these young people, they want to know more of the traditional proper catechism. And all of us know that's just not a matter. It's not usually a matter of just handing them a book. You should be there. It's part of. I'm exchanging my love, the heart to heart I have with our Lord. Now I know you have that, and there's a wonderful thing that can happen between that and then learning more and more about the faith. Yeah. But that's gone.
It's a very good point. I mean, the psalmist says, "As a deer that yearns for running streams, so my soul is thirsting for you, my God." And I think a lot of young people their soul is thirsting, and when they show up at some traditional chapels, they're given a shot glass to drink, not an abundance of water. From which to drink from, to satisfy their thirst. And that verse in the psalm has always stuck. It's a longing for God. As a deer yearns for running streams, so my soul thirsts for you, my God. that the thirst will only be quenched when we are satisfied with a relationship with God. And that is, as you have said, is the sacraments, but it's sound teaching, it's direction in Christian living. All of that comes parcel and parcel. Devotion, how the Christian raises his or her families, all of that participation in the fullness of Christian life is a true and proper drink from the running stream. And often one group gives a sip here and another group gives a sip there. But yeah, exactly what you said. We have to give an abundance of the living stream. Mm-hmm. And that's the trick. And it's hard to see that in the modern church, in the modern papacy. I think it's more Kool-Aid than fresh and running waters.
Unfortunately. There was something interesting that came across. I think both of you know one of my pet peeves is getting messages. A lot of people like that. I don't, but there are a few that I watch. And one of
mine too. Recently,
yeah, one of them that I watch. We've talked about this major theologian. He hasn't said he won't come on the show. He's just said he's booked for a while. But, you can read into that what you will. Anyway, I knew he was called to Rome this week, later in the week.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. And so then he posts again, doesn't say really anything. He just posts, how am I supposed to make sense of what is said on the plane and something like have it make sense with tradition, with what has always been the teaching tradition of the church? How am I supposed to put this all together? So I thought, is he doing this on purpose? Because he didn't say that's why they called him to Rome. But he makes this post, and I thought, isn't that interesting? Because he's another one I know the Archbishop and I have talked about that is kind of like straddling the line. And he's another one. I mean, he's a friend of Rarticelli and FSSP and all those, and the Remnant and I'm thinking he's another one, because he could explain much better than I could if he would just surrender. And maybe he's one of the ones that's holding on to, because he has a lot that he could lose. And he's got a family and everything. So I don't know, that whole prudential judgment in this time of, I don't know if this isn't a time of emergency, in the church, crisis in the church, then I don't know when there has been a time.
Yeah, I think this is much more of an emergency than when Marcel Lefebvre declared an emergency, justified his consecrations. I think this is worse, because it's there's a lot of heresy flying around. There's a lot of misleading statements. I keep coming back to the fact of the abandonment of the Chinese Catholics. I cannot get over that. I can't get over that. How the universal pastor could surrender that care of souls deeply hurts and worries me. I thought the red line for me was the canonization of Paul VI, but then there was a new red line. It was just the abandonment of Catholics who have fought so hard and still fight so hard, and for the shepherd to we're given the example of Christ, who leaves the 99 and goes out after the one. What the vicar on earth has done has kept the one and told the 99 to bleep off.
Yeah, and you said the word.
Or should I say bleat off?
Yeah, yes. But you
But
said the word, that the heresy and all, and I just before the show, I was thinking about all of that, and there I know in the secular political sphere, there's some teaching about you attack your detractors by those things. Like, so if you're doing something, if I'm embezzling, I'm supposed to accuse my detractors of embezzling.
right.
And, so you go on. And I find that that's what the church is doing to us. They've killed tradition, but we're the heretics.
Yeah.
You're in schism, you're the heretics, and we're just saying and doing those things which have always been believed everywhere and by all. He's the one.
Yeah.
But no one will say it. No one will. Why? Because there's a new Catholic Church, and I don't think there's any way around that. It's a new Catholic Church. It's a new hierarchy. There's a new magisterium, and they're okay with it, and the world's okay with it. In fact, they like it. And new Catholics, the ones that are filling up these suburban parishes, who still call themselves Catholics, I think we need to be telling you, you're not Catholic anymore, and I can tell you why you're not Catholic anymore.
And a number of people have, it's like, well, you're old Romans. Why do you care so much about the modern church? Well, the reason is that even though they're bleeding souls, they still have a lot of influence. They still have a lot of people who attend their church, and they are actively leading people astray. That's why I care. That's why I care what the Pope says. He's a global figure. That's why I care what the German bishops do. That's why I care whatever comes out of Supich's mouth. It's not because it affects me, because it doesn't. Or does it take one iota away from the truth of the Catholic religion? No, but it is an attack, and it is leading people astray. And it's the care of souls for which I am concerned. I am mandated by my very vocation, my calling, my consecration to care for souls. And that's why I have, what is it? Something in the game, whatever the analogy is. That's why I care.
I think that's a good point, because I would ask that question, that you two are shepherds in the theological and ecclesiastical sense. Okay, so what I heard you say is that when you see another shepherd abusing or misusing their flock, as a shepherd, you not only have a right but a duty to go and try to protect those sheep.
And you have a few that step up. We all know the names: Burke, Schneider. What's the other one? Thinking of
Vigano.
Strickland.
Vigano. The one or two others, but they do, and they bark loudly above their station. Actually, why? Because they care. And I think what's motivating, I mean, they're not motivated like the majority of bishops and cardinals. They're not motivated by promotion, because the way to be promoted is to keep stum and buy into it. They don't care about that. They care about souls, and that's why they speak out loudly. And honestly, I mean, I keep coming back to it. I think the watershed moment, I thought it was politics. The watershed moment was China for me. I mean, I'm actually getting emotional now talking about it. To abandon people like that, just to leave them to the most ravenous of wolves. Actually, it's not as if they're being, abandoned somewhere in a province of Spain. No, they've been abandoned to the Chinese Communist Party. And I mean, boy, if he has to answer for something at Judgment Day, it's going to look bleak for that. I just can't. And the author of the whole deal was Theodore McCarrick. I mean, if you can't if you can't see it as plain as the nose in your face, I mean, it's nefarious, and that's the best word I could use.
Well, that's what I wondered. What this woman who said, Francis has disappointed me. I was waiting to hear in what way has he not done all the liberal things that you want done, or is he not upholding tradition the way you think that tradition should be upheld? Or are you simply saying it's shame on him for picking on the traditionalists?
She talked about. She thought that he was. Again, it's media hype, so they're fed by the media. She thought he was great hope for the church. He was humble, and he was going to be great. It was a new era. But the more she got to know him, it was he was destroying tradition. And she also went on to talk about. There's the same lady went on to talk about the cancelled priests, people who were upholding orthodoxy, were being cancelled by Francis and Francis's bishops, and the fact that he's more concerned with not to take away from the fact that of climate change or ecology, but he's more concerned about things like that.
That's the greatest threat to the church. Yeah, he said that. Yeah. That's the greatest threat to the church is climate change.
But he's more concerned about that than he is about the faith.
Yeah.
And obviously, she's woke in the right direction. She's actually seen the emperor with no clothes, and she's incredibly worried about it. People are listening. People are not fools. I just wish more people, as I said, would use their intellect. But those who do can see the emperor has no clothes.
Well, I wonder, and I'm taking advantage of being here with both of you as last week, because I wonder, we've all said, especially about priests in the new rite who we're sympathetic to, because they desire to espouse what they see in the old rite. But can we really call them orthodox if they're teaching the new rite? Because at some point, we have to speak up in what we're seeing. So it's saying the new rite, and I know this is controversial, but if it's not Holy Mass, then is it blasphemous?
Well, I would say 9 times out of 10 it is blasphemous from what I've experienced.
I'm with
what
you.
I've seen.
Yeah, I'm with you. So
people with super soakers and skateboards up and down.
Yes, yeah, okay. Just like Francis said that most marriages are not sacramental. Remember when he said that? Okay, so I'm thinking along that must be the same way with the Mass. Okay, if they're blaspheming, then what are these priests doing, and what are they doing again to the sheep?
Again,
the sheep are not getting the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord.
I'm reluctant to speak out against them because I'm hoping and I pray that they're on a trajectory, that they will get to it at the end. So I don't want to speak against them. They're on the right direction.
But can we say that they're can we say that they're orthodox?
No, but they're getting there.
Okay, because my former community, that's their famous thing. Well, we're one of the Orthodox communities left in the church. And of course I found out pretty quick. They don't know what that means.
Yeah. And the Mass is the center and the summit of the faith. But these men are also promoting other traditions and encouraging people to prayer. They're giving them, for the most part, sound teaching, and I would hope they are on a trajectory to the fullness of the truth. So I'm reluctant to speak on it because I don't want to discourage them. What I would say to any priest who's in that position, that and a position that more and more of them will have to be because of this new motu proprio, is that hold fast to the truth in your hearts, teach your people orthodoxy, lead them towards the traditional liturgy, if your choice is to survive, you have to think about, again, what does it profit a man? if he gains the whole world and loses his soul. And it's not just as a priest, it's not just your own soul, it's those who are entrusted to you. And you have to remember that as a pastor. So I'd encourage them. I pray for them daily, and hopefully they will come across. Now, for faithful Catholics, it's if that's what's available, avail of it. If you happen to have a parish that is completely traditional, go to it. Vote with your feet, and I would tithe or donate to that parish, but definitely I would withhold all money towards the diocese for what they're promoting. But as a family, as a faithful Catholic, your first priority is for your soul and the souls of your family. So protect them, nourish them in the faith the best way that you can. That way, as I said, pastors will have to make answer, fathers and mothers will have to make answer for the way they brought up their children, not for the choices that they make down the line, but for what they instructed them. And I often remind lukewarm Catholics that say, well, we're not sure about baptism because we want to want them to choose for themselves. I say, okay, so no schooling then until they're 18, and then they can choose their own sort of schooling, because you'd want them to make that choice, right? Not be indoctrinated in any sort of form of education, would you? The whole thing is ludicrous, because you have to be responsible. This cult of individualism is quite dangerous. We are responsible for those who are entrusted to us. And that comes in family life, it comes in priestly life, and we will be made accountable for that. And even if you're not married or not, not a priest, you have responsibility to those around you, your family members, your neighbors, your community. All of that you will make account for. So be aware, instruct, and if all that you do is the truth. Now, these days, you'd probably get persecuted for it, but you won't be made accountable for it. It will not give you goat status if you've maintained the truth. So take courage in that. And the ultimate prize is the salvation of your soul and those whom you may have affected in a positive way. That's the prize. It's not for the vainglory of the world today, because you won't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's brought us to our time. So I'll just give out some notices before Bishop Kelly's benediction. Obviously, I returned to the UK from Slovakia tomorrow, Deo Valente. And that means that from Monday, normal live service will resume. So a live mass every day instead of replays of past masses. So 8:30, of course, traditional Latin Mass and homily every day from Monday. And Monday night, there will be an episode of The Domestic Church, which will be the first one for 2 weeks because of my travels. And then the rest of the schedule as usual. So those of you who follow the website and the blog, www.theoldroman.com, obviously you will have noticed in the last few days particularly there has been less activity than normal in terms of postings and things. That's partly because of being by by being on travels and my time being sort of taken up with preparations for ordinations and ordinations themselves and so on and so forth. So don't go away, keep watching, keep dropping in to the website, because going forward, of course, everything will start to resume normal service on there as well. I'd like personally to thank those of you who have kept me and on my travels in your prayers. Thanks too from the Ordinandi for your prayers, and do pray for the mission in Slovakia. We are expecting great things for the future. So and realize, for example, I mean, realize now Adam is the only subdeacon in the whole of Slovakia. He's the only subdeacon in the whole of Slovakia. That's how desperate the crisis in the church is. But as I say, many meetings this week, and clearly this has all been a part of God's providence. That's been evident to me and to Adam and to the faithful here, and to others who have sought us out and joined us. So prayers, please, for the continuance of all of that, and for our general apostolate as Old Romans. Bishop Kelly, would you be kind enough to give us a benediction?
Absolutely. And we call to mind all those who are struggling with a crisis in their faith, with the so-called cancelled priests. So we ask the Lord to give them courage, to give them support, and to recognize that the truth is the summit of our faith. So with that in mind, we commend them to the Lord, and we say, the Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost descend upon you and be amongst you forever. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Right, well, that's goodbye from me in Slovakia, which will be hello from me in United Kingdom next week. And it's goodbye from them.
From them.
Whichever way it is. Good night and God bless.
Bye for now.